Hello, good morning, everyone. So, my name is Stefan. Thank you, Violetta, for the introduction. Hope you are going to have quite an interesting session today. Um, feel relaxed. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Me or my colleague Stefan will also answer them. So, today's session, what would it be about? This is not intended as a from zero to hero session for Terraform, and also not intended as a session from zero to hero for Python. My goal for today is to create, let's say, the best environment for you to feel comfortable with using these tools. Mind you that this will be the first session from a series of webinars intended for, let's say, a more DevOps approach to OCI. We will start today with setting up a machine, a test machine, seeing how you can interact in OCI via using code, using API, using Terraform, and so on. We will start setting up our own machine, see what are the steps in order to do this. And we would continue to discuss a little bit about Python. Again, it's not intended as a Python tutorial. It's intended more as how to use Python in OCI context. We will be focusing on the authentication part. You will see that it's related to the first step where we set up our machine, we set up OCI CLI, and so on. Documentation. On the documentation side, I've added some interesting links that I encourage you to use. We will be discussing a little bit about them and what these links are. Some of them are for documentation and some of them are for some interesting labs that you might find pretty useful and pretty interesting in deploying. They showcase actually a very big application and something that would be, let's say, production ready, if you want to say like this, which encompasses a lot of technologies, something that you might find in your own environment. Good. All right, let's get started. So as you know, there are multiple ways of interacting in OCI. Either you can go and interact via the GUI, the normal web interface. Either you can use a Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell creates, let's say, a session of a Linux shell, which is attached and already authenticated in your tenancy for your user and for your user account, and that gives you the rights. And thirdly would be to create your own, let's say, developer machine. We'll be using the third option today a lot, but let me try to exemplify in a couple of minutes how you can interact and what the Cloud Shell would look like and how you can start it. Good. Right. So let me close this. First thing that you do, that you already know, today we'll be focusing on creating a couple of machines. We'll be interrogating some my own user account. We will see the availability domains and so on. You can do this if you want by using the compute interface, right? Create instance, and you'd be creating the instance on availability domains. You would be choosing the shape, the image, right? The shape of the machine. You would be setting up the network for your machine and adding the SSH key. Mind you that these are the steps that you normally perform in order to create the machine, and we would be seeing this created via Terraform and via Python later on. Good. Like I mentioned, one of the possibilities is to use the Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell can be used by pressing next to your home or your region here on the left. Click on Cloud Shell, and in a couple of seconds, it will open your own Linux terminal that is authenticated to OCI. It has all the bells and whistles that you can use. For example, it has OCI CLI. You can start adding to it different dependencies, libraries if you want, and start coding using this. Why I'm not using this and why I'm not showcasing this, you would find there are some demos online that showcase this functionality and that use this functionality, but I this kind of skips some steps that you would be using normally if you were having your laptop as a DevOps machine, or you'll be pushing code towards OCI. If you are very accustomed attendant to this kind of webinars, you've seen my session with OCI, where we used, again, our own machine, not the Cloud Shell. So basically, we try to simulate what you would be using in production. Good. Let's get further. Right. So, like I mentioned, OCI CLI is it's a Cloud Shell. It is basically a Linux shell that you can use inside your tenancy using the web interface. Normally, one thing that I forgot to mention is that in here in the Cloud Shell, one of the questions would be, okay, but what if I write the code locally and I want to run it here? You can upload the code here inside the Cloud Shell using the web interface, right? Upload, and you can upload into your home directory the code, and you can run it here with absolutely no problem. Good. Right. Now, if we speak about ways to interact, except the Cloud Shell, or going a layer down, right? Going into the actual code, going into the actual SDKs, going into the actual DevOps possibilities, we offer a lot of opportunities, right? Like Ruby, Python, Java, for you to use the OCI SDK. What we will see today would be Python, and how to authenticate via Python. It will be absolutely easy, and it's going to be very short, to be honest, because it's absolutely easy to do that. Good. Next thing that we also offer in terms of DevOps tools, we offer the plugins, PowerShell plugin, Jenkins, right? We offer also a Chef. Most surely this would follow in subsequent sessions. We will keep you posted on this. Follow us, and we will have subsequent sessions on other DevOps and other plugins. For today, we are going to speak about the Terraform provider, and we are going to speak on how things work, how you can interact with the Terraform provider, and how things would look like. Good. First things first, like I mentioned, we are going to use our own machine. Normally, what I've seen usually customers do is they use their own machine to try to interact. If there is quite a big environment to set up, or try to, I don't know, copy an environment, we will see later on how we can do that. Let me try to show you how you can set up your own machine, and what would be the first steps that you would do for this session today. Right. First things first, you need an account, an OCI account. You need to be administrator. You need to install OCI CLI, and then install whatever tools you are going to use further on. Mind you that OCI CLI is mandatory, and it's to be used for authentication purposes. OCI CLI, just as a note, also has, it's a powerful tool for managing OCI resources inside OCI. You can interact with different types of services. Good. How we are going to do this? We are going to install OCI CLI. Right, here are the commands. You will see them performed by me live. You would see it's very fast. Then we will install Terraform. Again, these are the commands you would see. You would find all of these commands if you just use your favorite search engine. They are basically, it's a copy paste job. It's not something very complicated. Finally, like I mentioned, Python is really easy to set up and really it's really fun and really easy to get started with as long as you know the language. You use pip and install the OCI libraries. Good. Very well. Let's go and let's look into how things are started. You would see me when we get to the code. You would see me. I'm using as a code editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I'm using SSH for the machines. Let's go here. Okay. Like I mentioned, let's go to compute instances. Let me exit the Cloud Shell. Okay. I cheated a little bit today. I created a machine for you, so we don't have to wait because I know time is limited. This would be the machine that we are going to provision the prerequisites. And I will show you how to take the information, how to take everything that you need to set up. Then we are going to use this machine because here I have added the code using SCP, and it's already there. Good. I think you're familiar already with creating the machine. This would be the VM01. Let's SSH into it. Right. This would be our Ubuntu machine. Let's start adding. The OCI CLI. Right. Use the default directories. No additional packages. Basically, enter, enter, enter. It won't take long. The next step that we will do, we will install the Python dependencies and so on the machine. Yes, add it to the path, right? Good. Next thing would be to add the OCI variable to the path. Let's test it. OCI. This is what you should get. Like I mentioned, OCI CLI, it's quite a very powerful tool. You can use it to automate different things or to interact via command line with a lot of the services. You see here, it's quite an extensive tool. Good. So, like I mentioned, OCI CLI. Next thing would be Python. Right. Give me a sec. First things first, you need to install pip. Pip is a packet manager for Python. With pip, you can install IPython, for example, or OCI CLI. Again, it's not going to take long. It's quite a fast process. And that's it. Right? Pip install OCI, because we are going to use it in our import, right? Pip install OCI. Good. Next thing that we would do, it's to install Terraform. Again, the commands you've seen them in my presentation. Again, not a lengthy process of time. Good. Now let's test what we installed. Terraform minus help will give us the Terraform help, right? Terraform help. It means we have Terraform. Let's try OCI. Good. And we installed the Python library for OCI. You can test that by opening a Python or opening IPython and then import OCI. If it works, then we are there. Good. This should be the installing of the prerequisites. This should be the installing of the first step. Now, here is it's a very simple step that you need to perform right now is to connect the OCI CLI and use your authentication inside the OCI CLI for your tenancy. Right now you have installed it, but you never got to authenticate yourself and never got to authenticate, never tied it to your own tenancy. Right, config OCI. Oops, written something badly, no worries. Enter the location of your config. We are going to use our home directory. Enter the user OCI. Now, go here. Go here. Right. This should be your user OCI. You would see this. This is the unique identifier that's attributed to any resource in OCI. Right. Use mine. User OCI. Enter the tenancy OCI. You can go here. You can go identity. What I recommend you always it's use search. Much faster, much easier. Use tenancy OCI. Now, here it would be your home region, right? Mine is Frankfurt. Either you can search it online or you can just copy paste it from here. EU Frankfurt 1. Do you wish to generate a new RSA API keys? Type yes. Enter the directory, use the home directory. Enter the name, I don't know, key 2. If you want a passphrase, let's select no. And here it is. Good. One last step before we actually can use the setup that we built is to try to take the keys from our home, the public key, to take the public key and to add it to the to our user. Go to your user, API keys. Like I said, I cheated a little bit because I added my API key for the other machine. How you can find this? Do an ls. You would not see here because OCI is hidden. cd.oci ls, and you'd find here the keys. Right? Do a cut. Do, let's say, key underscore public pem. Copy it from here. Add API key. Paste public key. And that's it. Good. Right now, you're ready to start rolling and you're ready to start actually using Terraform, Python, anything, you name it. You're done. Let's go further and let's look into how things are set up and how Terraform would click into place. Back to the presentation, we'll dive into the code after it. What you would normally find in a Terraform, and when you start writing Terraform code, you would find, for example, the main script, which would be in this case here, and which would be the first script that I'm going to exemplify, which would be query to get the availability domains for the for my region. Yes. You would find the availability domains, then you'd have the variables, tfvar and tfstate file. Mind you that tfstate, it's only found after you've run the script, after you've run the actual Terraform. Initially, what you would need to create would be the Terraform file, the variables, and the tfvars files. Let's try and let's see what you have here inside the files. Okay, This is my cheat sheet for today. Okay, get IDs. Like I mentioned, get IDs, you are going to have here for get IDs, which would be our script. You are going to see get IDs.tf, right? The TF form, TF state. Don't get intimidated about the long writing and so on. Terraform TF vars and variables. Good. This should be the three. This should be the three main files that you are going to see all over all of the setups, all of the scripts that you're going to use, run, create, and so on. Good. Let's get back to the presentation. Let's discuss a little bit more about how you can use Terraform, and then we will dive in actually into the script. We'll run the scripts and see how things look like and how things click into place. Good. In order to run Terraform, and in order to interact with Terraform like any other application that you're going to use in command line mode, you're going to use some commands. Terraform is pretty smart. It can use a lot of commands that you would see there, and it knows how to use multiple files and so on. But the main that we are going to use is Terraform init, right? Terraform plan, and Terraform apply. We are not going to use destroy for today, or maybe we will, I don't know. So basically, why this answers the question, why would I use Terraform for my environment? Normally would be to keep consistency of your deployments. I have a surprise for you a bit later on. There's a neat feature OCI has, and I will show you later on, but let's not jump ahead. But think of it like this. You create your own recipe, like your own, you want to create a soup, for example, right? You're going to use a recipe, and that recipe is going to be, you're going to write it down, and you can share that recipe with anyone, or you can, unlike a soup where you can evaluate the soup content, right? With Terraform, you can evaluate what is there, right? And if there were resources that were removed or modified or deleted, you can reconsolidate them. Also, this I've seen used for, especially for labs, when we do demos or when we do like Moonshop, for example, which would be the application that I was discussing initially, the one which is actually production grade, let's say. You can use apply. It will create a full-fledged environment, and then in order for you not go to each of the resources and delete them one by one and so on, you use destroy. It would know what was created, and it would destroy one by one in order for you to clean up your environment. Use this. I encourage you to use this, especially when you're learn Terraform, create things, and then use this function of destroy for you to clean up your environment and to manage your cost for your tenancy. Good. So Terraform init, plan, apply, destroy. What normally, and this should be the last slide, I promise, before we dive into the code. Normal syntax, what you would see, again, this is not intended as a zero to hero training for Terraform, but normally what you would see and normally what you would use would be variables, right? Inside the block, for example, or resources inside the block. A block is basically, let's say, container for other contents. Mainly when you create a machine, a VM, that will have a block. Inside would be variables, or would be settings, would be I don't know, the fingerprint, for example, for authentication, would be the image that you are going to use, and so on. Resources, like I mentioned, are objects, VMs, VCNs, VCNs being networks, right? I don't know, Kubernetes deployments and so on. Last thing, which would be normally how you would look like. You would look for when you would want to start deploying, and when you would want to start actually doing heavy stuff. You would use something called provider. Provider is basically how Terraform knows, and how Terraform knows how to interact with a certain, yeah, with a certain resource. Resource as in a cloud provider. For example, we have the OCI provider, which has some mandatory fields, and we will look into them, which would have some mandatory fields that you would need to fill in. So long story short, you're going to use the provider, which would tell Terraform what cloud provider you are going to use, or if you're going to use OCI or any other type of cloud provider, which would tell Terraform with what authentication to go there to the cloud provider, with what information to go there to the cloud provider in order to create the files. This again you would find inside the Terraform documentation, which is pretty neatly made. Also, Oracle has some getting started wizards, but again, you would see the same fields. So provider, resources, variables. Let's take this, of course, in comments, right? But providers, resources, variables. You would also see here we're going to use some other type of blocks, for example, output, when we are going to interrogate IDs. Good. Let's see now. Good. We use this machine. Oh, let's close this one. Let's presume that we are going to work on it. Let's see now on the code. Right. So the first example would be get ADs. Get ADs would list my ADs for that I have here, that I have available. You would see the output of this script used over and over again in the two other examples that I have. But this one is pretty straightforward. We have the provider, right? Tenancy seed, variable.tenancy seed, right? Now, where do we take this variable.tenancy seed? Well, we take it from variables, right? See, variable.tenancy seed. In order to use this in our main script, we are going to use var.tenancy seed. We are going to tell it that it should look in the variables file and look for tenancy seed. But as you see here right now, it's empty. It's just a variable declared, no value set to it. You would see in some other cases, you would see it instantiated and used directly inside the main script, but normally you would see these types of files pre-created, right? For example, tfvars and variables.tf, right? I'm always mentioning tfvars. Tfvars basically instantiate the variable. So let's look at the first one, tenancy seed with the actual seed used here in the variables, right? So we added the value to this variable. Then inside our script, inside the provider, we are going to use this. So what basically happens, right? We have variables that create the placeholder for the variable itself. We have tfvars, right? tfvars place a value inside the variables, and then we are going to use the variables inside the get ads, the main program. Be it we are going to use it in the provider, right? Be it we are going to use it along the way. Good, right? Get ads. Now, like I mentioned, this should be the provider. We saw how to instantiate, how to use the variables, how they are created, how they are filled in. Right. Next thing, we are going to look at blocks. Like I mentioned, blocks are actually blocks, right? Are pieces of Terraform code that do something. For example, this should be a data block, right? We are going to interrogate um, our tenancy, right, for the ADs for my region, right? Next block would be an output block, right, where we are going to see the output of the first block. Mind you one thing, how you can take from one block the information created by another block. If you're a little bit familiar with programming, this would be easy peasy for you. Basically, we are going to say data, or let me clear the drawing. We are going to say data. So it's a data block. OCI identity availability domains. OCI identity availability. See where I'm going with this? Dot identity availability domains. Dot ADS, because this is the one, right? ADS of the type OCI identity availability domain, right? The data block, right? The ADS. I want the ADS, and I want the information from ADS called availability domains. See, pretty straightforward. Now, let's see how it works in actual life. Let me close this here. Let's do an ls. It's inside ADS. Let's do a clear. Let's do an ls. And as you can see, I have my script here with everything. Terraform apply. Remember the command plan apply, delete, and so on. Terraform apply. It takes a bit, and it showed you some pretty weird stuff, right? Like compartment ID and so on, what the name is for my tenancy and so on, right? This would be the output of the code. Think of if you create an output to interrogate users, if you create an output for anything else, it would output it here. Right. Good. Let's see one other thing. I got passed around the following information. Terraform TF state. Terraform TF state is created once you first run the output. TF state basically keeps the information of your infrastructure, right? So let's say you create 3 machines, right? You create 3 machines. How would Terraform know that you created 3 machines? If you delete one, for example, it would know by using this TF state file. So when you run it, when you try to consolidate your environment, it would see that you have 1 machine, second machine, but the third machine is missing, and it will create the third machine. This is using the TF state. Pretty straightforward, right? Here in my TF state, because it was an output, you would see, look, seems familiar, this one with this one, same thing. Absolutely same thing. So like I mentioned, basically think of it like an output behind Terraform. Good. Right. This would be the first script. Pretty straightforward. No, not a lot of information here. Just we got the availability domain information for the for me. One thing that I didn't mention. Remember when we set up the machine, when you looked for the user OCI, we went here, we looked for my OCI, this one, right? There is another thing. TF-vars, you can, for you to fill in those variables, right? you can take this, the tenancy OCID, the user OCID, it's the same user OCID in my case. Private key path, this would be where I stored my key, right? For the fingerprint, for example, private key part would be the key that I use for, would be this API key. Home region, like I mentioned, my region is Frankfurt. The fingerprint of the key 29C5, right? 29C5. This you can find using the GUI. You only need it to fill it in once, and you can use it over and over again. Good. Let's see. We made a query. Let's see how you can create a VM. Let's kick it up a notch, right? We create a VM. The new, in order to create a new virtual machine, we are going to use the provider. Again, you will always see this, the provider. We are going to use a block. See, it starts here and it ends here. Inside the block, we are going to use the type, right? The OCI core instance, right? And we are going to name this inside, not the display name, but we are going to use this inside Terraform. We're going to name this Ubuntu instance. If you want to call it, you would say resource.oci core instance.ubuntu instance, and then I don't know, dot shape, for example, and it would output the shape, or you can, I don't know, yeah, you can output it, the shape if you want. Good. Now, availability domain. Remember when we initially queried ADs, you can use this here, or you can use, you can take my get ADs script, use the output from that, use, I don't know, OCI, core tenancy, availability domain. Next thing would be compartment ID. I can use this, or I can place it inside a variable, right? And instantiate it with tfvars. But here I used it like this, just to exemplify that you can use your variables directly inside the script, right? Shape, again, you can use a variable. Here I used text. Source details, source images, right? Type image, display name, what would be the display name, and what would be the subnet. In this example, I'm going to right now I have the demo machine, the one that I'm using SSH, which is inside the VCN. And what I'm going to do with this script, like you see, it's to create a machine inside the same VCN with the same security lists, same everything. To take note from here is one, you always need to use the provider. Two, here is the block to create a machine. Each block, again, this is in the documentation, so you don't need to remember this by heart. And also there's a secret, there's a ton of boilerplate code that you can find on GitHub created by Oracle, and you can just copy paste it, modify it a little bit, and you'll have your own environment up in a couple of hours, from searching GitHub to actually deploying, right? Variables can be also here, also in tfvars, and the fact that you can create you will have blocks, right? And you will have, for example, source details, which will have multiple properties like source ID and source type, like image. Good. Let's see how this works. Right, ls cd code VM. Let's do an ls. Right, you would see those files, but also the Terraform tf state. Why you would see tf state? Because I cheated. I ran the script before the meeting just to see if it works. Right, so Terraform apply. It would ask you, right now we are not querying, right now we are building stuff. It would ask you if you accept. What you would see here is more expanded view of the actions that will be performed. Right? Let's say yes. And it will start creating the machine. See? Good. Right. While the machine is creating, and it should appear in instances, not identity, in instances. Look, it's already provisioning. Terraform VM, it's already provisioning. Good. So, takeaways until now. TFVars, variables, blocks, variables can be written directly into the Terraform file, but we normally recommend that you go with TFVars and variables. And inside the block, inside the resource block, again, don't try to remember this by heart. You would have documentation, and you would also have boilerplate code with all of the attributes that you can put inside a core instance and so on. So just remember how you are going to use this. Okay, good. Last script that I'm going to show you, but first let me see. We created the machine, right? We added one resource because we only created the machine, not a network, not a storage, not anything like this. And it's created. Let's see if it's created. Well, it's still in provisioning state because right now it's OCI platform's job to provision the OS, provision everything here, right? It's in running. Like I mentioned before, terminate, you would terminate it manually. Don't do that because right now you are becoming scripting gurus and DevOps gurus. Use Terraform destroy. Terraform destroy. Yes, and it will be destroying the machine. We will see it in a couple of seconds. Terminating. Good. Right. With no further ado, let's jump into an actual how things. Normally, what you would see until now, it's very easy, very straightforward. Terraform is easy. Terraform is really nice to use. One thing that I've discussing with some of my colleagues, what they've seen as a daunting thing is that like any tutorial, right? We start everything's easy with provider, with the resource, with the block and so on. But at a certain point, it starts adding more and more and more files and so on. Yes, this is true. Usually when we create a more advanced setup, we would break things into multiple files. For example, this one, Terra environment with storage. What we'd be creating here would be a machine with its own VCN, with its own storage, with its own resources and so on. Here you're going to see first thing, VM and VCN. You are going to see a little bit more complex script. Again, like I mentioned, you are going to see here the provider, variables that we are going to use here, right? Again, like I mentioned, you can use variables, you can instantiate them in the variables and then TFVars, but you can also create them here. For example, here I'm going to use how many gigabytes. The resources, the shape. Okay, need to stop drawing, right? And we'll create core instance, we'll create it in AD1 in Frankfurt. We are going to create a VNIC. See, it's basically the same thing as the script before, but with more and more blocks, with more ingredients. Internet gateway, route table, and so on. Again, don't get scared because, for example, if you create a OCI core VCN named test VCN, if you want to add to this VCN different stuff, call it by OCI core VCN dot test VCN, right? Test VCN, and use the property default route table. And then you can set up the rules for that. OCI core subnet, test subnet, and you create the test subnet and add it where? OCI core VCN, test VCN, default security list, and the property default security list, right? So this is how we would call inside the script different resources that we created. Now, like I mentioned, here is the machine, here is the network, but what if we create storage? We create a file called storage, default size, right, 40, and we would create it here. Again, how are we going to call things from one file to the other using the same verbiage like where was it? OCI core VCN, for example. If we were to move this into another file, we would call it the same way, right? Good. Let's run this and let's see how it performs. See, one instance destroyed. We see here what we destroyed, and it's in terminated state. Good. Clear. cd ls cdnv.2 ls, right? Terraform apply. It would ask you for a yes, and it's the same thing over and over again. In production, you don't not use directly Terraform apply, right? Because you're not going to measure never and then actually cut once, right? You're going to measure several times and then cut once. Good. See, right now we're in provisioning state and so on. Good. Environment then. Now, like I mentioned, I have a surprise for you, and this is something that OCI does really, really great, and it's thought for DevOps and for people that are, let's say, thinking of infrastructure as code, for example, right? Run your script locally, what we did, or deploy it as a stack inside OCI. This is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. What we can do here is write the Terraform script. Better yet, let me show you. See, the machine is provisioning right now. The script is finished, right? Right now it's OCI's job. Let's look at stacks, resource manager. Now, what does a stack do? Let's see, create a stack. My configuration, you can drag and drop, for example, your make VM, right? The code that I'm using here, right? Put a description into it, configure the variables if they are already configured. See the same variables that I'm using in TFVAR and variables, they're already configured here because I placed the file with TFVARs and so on. If I didn't, I would have to paste them manually and to enter them manually. Again, it depends on you, depends on your security information. Good. Well, I think we are going to run a little bit 5 minutes over our time, but bear with me a bit because it's absolutely amazing. Drag and run your actual Terraform scripts inside this stack. Or you can, let's click on cancel, for example, right? This would be my code VM. You can go here, you can apply, plan, and so on. Not use your machine, not install OCI CLI, and have it here whenever you want to raise a certain infrastructure. You will have it here and it will run. It will show you what were the jobs, right? Mine succeeded. And then we destroyed it, right? We'd have here the variables, right? If you want to edit the variables, see these ones. There is no variable here that needs to be entered. Let's see. You click plan, it would do the plan, it would see what resources need to be created. If you click apply, it would start creating the resources. Here inside the logs, you would see the same output that I'm getting here. Good. There is another thing that this stack detail can do, which is pretty amazing, and it's something that customers use for disaster recovery scenarios, or for things which are more complicated. Let's say you have created an environment which is very complicated, very unique, very difficult to reproduce. You have two options: either spend weeks drinking coffee in the evening just to keep awake. See, absolutely the same output that you would do, but this time you run it inside OCI. Let's see if it's created a machine, a compute instance, and voila, it created the machine. It's there. I didn't use my machine. Let's go again to stacks, and let me show you the absolutely amazing thing. Existing compartment. So you've created a huge infrastructure inside an existing compartment, and you want to migrate it to another compartment. Select existing compartment. I don't know. Let's select my compartment, right? Use all services, or you can select certain services like API gateway, just some resources that you can copy. Name it to create the stack. Click on next. No variables here because it's creating from one place to another. Review and then create. And it would create for you. You can deploy it into another compartment, right? You can migrate what you have in one compartment with just a few clicks, leave OCI to it. It would migrate into another compartment, whatever you have. This one, for example, this is a really neat surprise. I forgot about this one. This is an EBS suite that we already, the scripts and everything is created. You just import the Terraform script, run it, and you'll have your full environment already created. Good. All right. We are nearing our last subject. So Terraform, you can use it as a stack inside OCI. You saw how Terraform works. You should be fairly comfortable with Terraform by now. Last thing that I mentioned is Python. Again, this is not going to be a training for Python. This is going to be a more of a discussion about how to use Python inside OCI. Python has an SDK created by OCI. You can use that SDK to interact with tons of resources. For example, I don't know, DNS, email services, budgets, VMs, cloud guards, certificates, you name it. So think of it like you can interact with a whole bunch of resources inside OCI. Even more services, like I mentioned, OS management, Visual Builder, VM solution, and so on. How you are going to use this? Well, it's pretty straightforward. The authentication used by Python is going to take the information from OCI CLI, right? Inside OCI, when you set up OCI CLI, it's got to ask you a ton of questions, a bunch of questions like user seed, fingerprint, blah, 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 blah. And it created the default profile. You can create multiple profile, but it created the default profile. Now, when you create the script, you are going to use it as the authenticator by creating instantiating config to use the file and the default profile, like you see here, and then using the identity client using that config that you created initially. So these two code lines. Let's see how they look in an actual code. Let's close Terraform. Let's go to Python. Get user, for example. This would get the information from my user, right? Import OCI, config from file with the default, right? And then use identity and instantiate the identity with the configuration. What happens afterwards, it's actually the code. This would be the most simple example: get the information from a user and print it out, get the information from myself. This is what you need to take, and this is what you would need to use in order to interact with Python. Let's see. Let's cd py get user py get py get user. Let's cut get user py, and you would see here exactly the same code that I'm using, right? Absolutely same thing. If you run this, you would get the information. Let's say Python get user py. Oops, sorry, my bad. And it would get the information. Right about me. Right. Hello, this is me, and this is my email address. Right. Good. So again, use this default config. Let's see, and let's go there. Let's see where it takes the config from. Right. One thing that you don't see here, right, and unless you don't see the OCI directory, but if you do an ls minus ls minus, let's say, you would see it here, and here is the OCI directory, cd.oci ls, and you would see the config, cut config, and here it is, right? This is what is being used as an authenticator in Python. Straightforward, absolutely, as long as you know the language, absolutely. Environment demo. Well, like I mentioned, this would be the first script. You can build on top of it whatever you want with all the libraries. There is a, and I attached it to this presentation at the end, additional resources. You would have the SDK information with all of the libraries, all of the classes, and all of the methods that you can use inside your script. For example, if you want to create a user and a group, again, import OCI. You are going to import some modules. All of the time, you are going to use this two in your main script. Of course, you can call other scripts and so on, but in your main script, you are going to use this two. See, here I'm going to use, and I'm going to say the default profile, right? I'm going to implicitly say the default profile, but you can use this. It would very much work, and it would take the default profile. Good. Right. And here it creates a user and a group, right? You are going to use the methods, right? You are going to create the group. You are going to instantiate the description of this group, the name of the group, right? And use type of CRUD requests that you are going to interact with using SDK. Good. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope this was informative. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next upcoming sessions. Thank you very much.